Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Bit of an interesting and different video for all of you today. Many of you are aware that the Williams FW31, in addition to being Williams' 2009 Formula 1 car, is available in two premier sims. They are iRacing and Assetto Corsa. It occurred to me that I've yet to see a real comparison between these two sims and these two versions of the same car in those two sims, so that's what I've decided to do here today. The FW31, what's it like to drive in iRacing as well as in Assetto Corsa? We are in iRacing right now in the pit lane at Imola. We'll be conducting this test at Imola today. I have, to the best of my ability, attempted to make the track and atmospheric conditions identical in both iRacing and Assetto Corsa in an effort to eliminate as many variables as possible so that we can get a more accurate representation of what the differences in the two sims are in terms of the physics, not only in the general sim itself, but the implementation of the physics in this particular car. So, we're going to get out on track and talk about what this thing is like to drive. Turn on our pit lane speed limiter. And off we go onto the racetrack. Do an install lap here just to get everything warmed up. Go up and down through the box a couple of times. For this test, I have turned the atmospheric temperature up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the track state is well rubbered in. It's the highest rubbered in setting that I can get on both of the sims. Also running on the medium tires in Assetto Corsa. iRacing, we can't really pick the tire compound, but it feels like it's about analogous to the medium compound in Assetto Corsa. Scrubbing across the track surface here just to get some temperature into those tires. And we will get on with the program here in earnest. Some heat in the brakes there. Generally feel the car out. The FW31 has been in iRacing for quite some time. I don't actually remember when it was debuted. I think it was either late in 2009 or early in 2010. Of course, being a 2009 car, it couldn't have come out too much later than that, considering Formula 1 has moved on tremendously since then, and of course, the MP430 has been added to iRacing since. The FW31 pretty much consigned to the realm of non-official races, simply because it is a Formula 1 car, but it's not representative of things that are currently running in the real world. Nonetheless, it is an absolutely fantastic car to drive in both sims. But specifically, how is it in this one? Only on our first time lap here, so things are still not quite up to temperature in terms of the tires, particularly the front tires. But we're already getting some bite into the corner, so that is quite welcome. It's starting to settle down onto the racetrack now. Temperatures are pretty much up to where they need to be. We can now get on with the show. iRacing, I would say, is the premier consumer-grade racing sim out there. It is unmatched to this day in terms of physics. If you want to get a sense of what it must be like to drive a real race car, start in iRacing because the learning curve is immense. When I first came into iRacing, having run R Factor exclusively for a couple of years, the learning curve was actually still quite steep. Of course, R Factor being from 2005 in its initial release and iRacing coming out in 2008, technology had moved on quite a bit by that point. And of course, iRacing is continually updated 4 times a year, I believe. How iRacing compares to a sim like Assetto Corsa, however. You have to remember that Assetto Corsa is a completely different design philosophy than iRacing. iRacing has a very niche market, has very specific clientele with very specific needs. Assetto Corsa, Kunos have had to develop that game with multiple platforms in mind, obviously releasing on PC first, but they're now on PlayStation 4, which is, of course, a console. So they have to keep the requirements and demands of those different platforms in mind from scratch whenever they begin new developments of that game. And they also have to remember the demands and necessities of their different clients. iRacing knows that pretty much everybody who's on iRacing has a wheel and pedal setup, and most likely a decent PC that's able to run the thing half decently. Kunos, with Assetto Corsa, remember they're dealing with casual players as well as more hardcore simmers. They're dealing with people with wheels and pedals. They're also dealing with people who are playing on a gamepad of some sort, and also I bet there is a contingent of AC players who run with keyboard. So Kunos have to keep that in mind as they develop their game. iRacing, they can tailor their approach specifically to the sim market and to the sim market alone. Because of this, I have to say the physics model in iRacing is the best out there today for consumer-grade sims. Assetto Corsa, however, even though they have had to deal with all of those demands placed on them by the different media through which their content is consumed, they have still done an absolutely miraculous job. The fact that this is even a viable comparison to make, I think, speaks to that. In any event, though, the FW31, what does it feel like to drive? Well, it feels like a modern Formula 1 car. There's a lot of downforce, there's a lot of braking performance, there's a lot of mechanical grip, as you would expect. Being the 2009 car with slick tires, big slicks all around, kind of similar to what we're going to see next year in Formula 1 in 2017. There is grip everywhere. Also, this car in particular had the controversial double diffuser, along with Toyota and Braun, which generated a lot of aerodynamic grip on the underside of the car at the rear. And that also helps in terms of distributing that cornering force to the tires. Because the physics model in iRacing is what it is, however, there are so many different parameters that you have to think about and contend with while you're out on track. You may notice through some of the slower corners, particularly when I use a lot of curbing, you'll see the car is bouncing quite a bit. This is something that really impacts the speed at which you're able to get back onto the power out of a corner. If the car's bouncing too much, the rear wheels are just going to be somewhat airborne. In other words, not in full contact with the racing surface, and therefore you're going to spin them up and at worst spin the car. So that bouncing effect does have an impact on how quickly you can get back on the power, and when you do get back on the power, how much of it do you administer via your right foot. Also, the back end on this car, I did mention that it has the double diffuser and the big slick tire certainly don't hurt, but the back end does feel a little bit nervous, particularly through high-speed corners. It just kind of feels like that it may not be 100% there, which is kind of hindering me from really being able to lean on it. In other words, you look at trackside footage of a Formula 1 car at speed, particularly 2003, 2004, 2005, and even into 2006, you see them how they just suck themselves down onto the road and they're able to just bite the tarmac for all it's worth. Cops Corner at Silverstone is a famous place to see something like this. This car doesn't quite have that same earth-moving effect about it. It tends to not quite skate along the tarmac, but it sort of caresses the tarmac rather than bites it. Braking performance? well, it's very good. It's a Formula 1 car. But also, the brakes, you can lock them. And they're actually somewhat easy to lock right from the outset as you come into the braking zone at the end of a long straight. Coming into the Tamburello chicane here, you'll notice that I can't quite apply full brake pressure immediately. You see my onboards in Assetto Corsa. The opposite is true. I'm able to apply full brake pressure and then through cadence braking modulate that brake pressure as the speed comes down, and of course downforce starts to drop away as your speed drops away, as the speed of the air going over the wings drops. But in this, I'm having to be more judicious with the brake application in all situations. It's much easier to lock the wheels. Having to hesitate a bit on the throttle there, coming out of the Acqua Minerale corners. And there you saw that heavy braking zone, some puffs of smoke from the front end, even at high speed like I was. So it is possible to lock those wheels up. See, coming over entrance curbing or apex curbing, you can see how the car just bounces a little bit. Perhaps I could dial that out some more with some adjustments to the heave dampers, but that bouncing really is starting to affect how the car runs in this sim versus Assetto Corsa. And another big puff of smoke from the front brakes. Variante Alta. Have to be careful how you attack the curbs through this one, particularly the curb in the second element of the chicane, because that directly impacts your exit from the corner. And with this long straightaway blast up into 7th gear, you want to make sure you get a clean exit so you get on the power as early as possible. I should also note that I am not using KERS, simply because I just cannot tell you when precisely I'm using KERS and how much I'm using it, how long I'm using it, so not using KERS for the sake of experimental control. Back end got a little squirrely there under acceleration, perhaps a little bit over the exit curve, but you can see my characterization of the rear end is a little nervous. You can see it playing out there. See how long the car just bounces out of the exit of the Variante Alta. It keeps me from getting on the power. That bouncing is something that I really don't see so much in Assetto Corsa, at least in the FW31. F2002, yes. F2004, yes. But not so much in the FW31. That car just feels a whole lot more planted generally. Having to tickle the throttle there on the exit of Tamburello. Not quite at full throttle, not quite at half throttle, sort of hovering around 70 and 80% or so. Is that back end getting squirrely again out of Tosa. again, just how long it takes to get the car settled down out of Variante Alta. That is probably the definitive characteristic of driving this car in iRacing at this circuit.
Careful with the throttle application, short shifting a little bit there through the middle of the chicane. And there we go, we kept the back end under control out of Tosa that time. Totally messed that up for all it was worth. You can see though I'm a little tentative to hit curbs.
You got about 5 laps of fuel.
Simply because the car bounces so much. Again, that's probably down to heave dampers and maybe even a little bit down to tire pressures, but that bouncing is the characteristic that distinguishes this car in iRacing to Assetto Corsa, at least in my opinion, and you're going to be able to see the Assetto Corsa run in a couple of minutes, of course, but preliminarily, that is what I'm thinking. Now I'm starting to lose time in the acceleration zones rather than gain it. Again, because I think those tires are just going off a little bit. Had a good exit from the Rivazza corners. Yep, still can't quite make full throttle there out of Tamburello. See, they're just hesitating on the throttle a little bit, just waiting for the car to settle down. And got away from me a little bit. Definitely, I think you have now gotten a fair impression of how this car behaves in iRacing. It's a little bit nervous all around. There's plenty of aerodynamic grip. There's plenty of mechanical grip, probably more mechanical grip than there is aerodynamic grip, but still, all in all, a little bit nervous, mostly due to the amount of heave that you have in the chassis.
You have about 2 laps of fuel left.
That is okay for our purposes because we are going to pit. Into the pit lane here. So overall impressions from the run, the car feels reasonably stable at high speed and even in medium speed, but the rear end is a little bit nervous. Couple of laps it takes for the tires and brakes to come up in temperature, as you would expect, and then you can start to settle into a rhythm. The back end feels nervous, but it's the heave in the chassis, I think, that is the cause. In Assetto Corsa, as you will see, you're not going to see much of that in terms of visual representation of the heave, seeing the horizon line go up and down as you're coming through a corner, particularly over apex curbing. And of course, this is illustrated most dramatically at Variante Alta, where coming out of that corner, I have to use a lot of the run-out, actually, the run-out curbing on the exit there, which actually is not on Assetto Corsa's version of Imola, but I'm using that run-out curbing just to get the car settled so I can start to bleed the power in a little bit more, and then eventually back on full song as we go up through the gears. But interesting, I have to say. It's an interesting car to drive, and as you'll see in Assetto Corsa, that transfers between sims. So we'll see you over in Assetto Corsa in just a moment. Welcome back to Imola, and welcome to Assetto Corsa. Here we are in Assetto Corsa's version of the FW31. This is version 1.3.8 by Costar. It just received a couple of midstream updates before the 1.4 version that I'm pretty sure is on the way, considering that the version 1.4 of the F2002 by the same developer has already been released for quite some time and is absolutely wonderful. However, how does this car feel compared to the FW31 we were just playing around with in iRacing? Let's find out. First thing I notice is there's no manual pit lane speed limiter, and the pit lane speed limit itself is about 12 mile an hour faster, 37 miles an hour over on iRacing, 49 over here in Assetto Corsa. Just an install lap just to get some temperature in the tires and brakes. Go up and down through the box a couple of times. Just make sure everything feels okay. Already just running at low speed, I can feel that the front end is a whole lot more positive on this version of the car. I'm sure some of that is probably down to setup. However, more so, it may be down to the way that AC runs its physics model in comparison to how iRacing runs its physics model. I'm not entirely sure of the specifics on all of that, but I do know that in general the setups in iRacing are a whole lot more specific than the setup options that we have in Assetto Corsa. Therefore, it may stand to reason that there are more variables at play in iRacing's physics model than there are in Assetto Corsa's. The way that this car feels here on Assetto Corsa is pretty much fundamentally different to the way it feels in iRacing. Like I said, it has a whole lot more front-end feel and a whole lot more front-end positivity. The car is a whole lot more pointy than it is on iRacing. But at the same time, things also feel a bit more loose in the steering. There's not nearly as much in terms of steering weight that I can feel right now. But in general, the car feels a whole lot more planted. It feels like there's more grip, both mechanical and aerodynamic. Already on this first flying lap, I have the feeling that I can attack these corners a little bit harder than I could over on iRacing. Obviously, the sounds are very different here in AC. I tend to like the AC sounds better in terms of overall engine sound, but I do like the big clunks from the gearbox that you get over on iRacing. Over here on AC, you don't really hear that so much. You more so just hear the revs changing as you go through the gearbox. I'm outbraking myself a little bit on this lap. Things are still not quite up to temperature. However, you may notice that I'm able to use the same gears through the same corners here in AC that I am on iRacing, so that is pretty interesting. Also, you can see straight line speeds are pretty similar. Again, just for controlled conditions, I am not using curves. Just because I can't 100% guarantee that I would use the exact same amount of curves in the exact same place in both runs, so I've decided not to use curves. But yep, for sure, approaching the Tosa corner in 5th gear right at the end there. In iRacing, same thing here in Assetto Corsa. Having to hesitate on the throttle there on the exit of Acqua Minerale coming up the hill toward here, Variante Alta, and same sort of mechanism of throttle control, if you will, in iRacing. Having to hesitate a little bit just to make sure that the rear end is settled. Definitely this car is a whole lot more confidence-inspiring in Assetto Corsa than it is in iRacing. It feels like it doesn't feel like it's heaving quite as much. There's a little bit more bump damping, and it doesn't feel like the car is bouncing in terms of getting light over bumps, and particularly getting light in acceleration zones. Also, through this corner here, I can take this flat, absolutely flat, no problem at all here in Assetto Corsa. In iRacing, can't do that. There's a little bit of hesitation on the throttle. I'm well over 50% throttle through there in iRacing, but not to the floor. Because that front end is a bit more positive here, I'm able to place the car more accurately as well on the apex, particularly through that fast sweeping first element of Acqua Minerale. That's just, I have time to think and I have time to react to what the car is doing, and I have time to plant that right front wheel on those apex curves. Of course, here around Imola, the curbs can be a little enticing, but a little dangerous, so discretion is the better part of valor sometimes, but for the most part, you can ride the curbs a little bit more heavily all around in this car, in AC. Seventh gear, exact same gears through all the corners, the exact same shifting cadences for the most part. That does carry over pretty much 1-to-1, which is pretty impressive. Brakes also feel, I won't say they feel better in AC, but they feel a little bit more predictable. They're a little bit more tractable. In iRacing, I've noticed this in all of the open-wheeled cars, particularly the DW12, the FW31, and the MP430. The end of a long straight where you've got maximum speed and theoretically maximum downforce, if you slam on the brakes, as you really should be able to do in iRacing, you will lock up at very least the front wheels, no matter what you do with your brake bias settings. That only happens to me in iRacing. That has really never happened in Assetto Corsa, and I'm not entirely sure what the cause of that is. I've played with the brake bias, I've played with the brake pressure. No matter what I do, the only way I can avoid locking the front wheels at the end of a straight into a big braking zone, with all that downforce to help me, is just to be a little bit more careful on the pedal. I don't know if that's something that is actually realistic or if that's a quirk in iRacing, but that's something that I've noticed for a number of years now with open wheelers in iRacing. Doesn't happen here in AC. You can see if you watch the pedal trace in the lower left, when I get into a big braking zone, in a car like this I almost always start at 100% brake pressure and then through cadence braking ramp it up and down as needed to avoid locking those wheels, because of course as you slow down, the air passing over those wings also slows down, which means that you lose downforce. Makes sense, and it falls linearly in relation to your speed. Definitely able to get on the power a bit sooner through all of these corners. And not only am I able to get on the power sooner, but the amount of confidence that I have is a lot higher in this car, this version of it rather. I don't know if that's, again, down to the physics. Is it the tire model? Not entirely sure. I've done the best I can to make sure that the ambient temperatures and track conditions are as identical as possible between the two sims. So trying to eliminate as many variables as I can. Also got a bit more of an ability to brake and turn in here in AC than I do in iRacing. Yeah, you can trail brake a bit in iRacing, but pretty much all of your stopping is done in a straight line there. This, I have a little bit of play. Yes, again, here, most of the stopping is also done in a straight line, but I can get away with a little bit more speed on turn in. And again, over the curbs there, I've already out to the car here in AC is bouncing a whole lot less. Again, enabling me to get on the power sooner. Having to be a little careful on the throttle there out of Tosa. only because this car has a tendency for snap oversteer on acceleration, so just want to make sure everything really is secure before you give it the beans. Love that sweep under the bridge. Coming into the two Rivazza corners at the end of the lap. Just, it really exemplifies the grip and the speed of a modern Formula One car. Just awesome. And of course this blast down the straight with the elimination of the old Traguardo corner. Just so much impressive. Wide on entry, sweep in for the apex, take the exit curbing. Awesome. All in all, I have to say that the iRacing version is harder to drive. It absolutely is, but I wouldn't say it's harder to drive because it's necessarily more accurate a recreation of the FW31. iRacing, the physics model, yeah, I definitely believe it's a bit better than Assetto Corsa. But given the fact that Assetto Corsa is a multi-platform series, not series, but release, they're trying to cater to all sorts of different players. They're trying to cater to hardcore simmers, they're trying to cater to more casual gamers. They have to deal with people who have steering wheels and game pads and, heaven forbid, keyboard drivers. Given the fact that they have all of that to grapple with, plus developing for computers and console, I have to say that just the fact that I'm able to make a viable comparison between iRacing and Assetto Corsa, and keep in mind Assetto Corsa using a third-party mod, I have to say that, if anything, this just speaks to how good Assetto Corsa is. iRacing, yes, it's a purpose-built racing sim on the consumer level, but with the advanced user in mind. Assetto Corsa is not, to be honest. Kudos for AC, they have tried to blend the perfect combination of graphics, performance, and physics, and I think they absolutely hit the nail on the head in every possible regard. iRacing is not so concerned with those kinds of things. iRacing is more so concerned with the actual racing experience. In terms of how cars feel, is physics believable, things like that. Kunos, they are trying to sell you an entire package. They're trying to sell you a game as well as a sim. They're trying to entertain you as well as teach you something. iRacing is much more so an academic type experience where you just have to learn how to drive, how the cars work, and how do you work with them. But Kunos, as an overall entertainment package, has managed to do quite the job as well with integrating physics into this sim. So, absolutely wonderful comparison, and I think maybe it's something that not too many people have thought to do before, so hopefully this was an interesting sort of exercise for you, and hopefully you're able to see some of really the merits of both sims in terms of how awesome they are with their high-fidelity physics, but more so how awesome Assetto Corsa really is, because the fact that I'm able to use the same gears through the same corners in the same car in both sims, which have distinctly different origins and distinctly different purposes,
I think that really speaks to just the level of fidelity that sim racing is beginning to approach these days, and it really is something pretty special. Those of you who are more casual players of Assetto Corsa and maybe you've not tried iRacing, if you are half good in Assetto Corsa, you will probably be half good in iRacing as well. I wouldn't let it be intimidating anymore. I know when I first started in iRacing, having only run R-Factor, the learning curve was very steep because R-Factor, as good as it was, by the time iRacing was released, technology had just moved on by that much, and the learning curve was essentially starting from zero again, just as it was when I first started to run R-Factor. But the transition from iRacing into Assetto Corsa was much easier. And I think the same will probably translate in the opposite direction, Assetto Corsa to iRacing, simply because things are just getting that good these days. But in any event, I hope that this was an interesting video for all of you. I hope maybe you've learned something and maybe your curiosity has been piqued to try a similar test of your own. Stay tuned for hot laps in iRacing and Assetto Corsa in the FW31, and of course, that is when we will consult the almighty stopwatch just to see which one is actually faster when it's driven by me on the day, under as controlled conditions as possible. So stay tuned for the hot laps, everybody. FerrariMan601 saying thank you very much for watching, and we will see you soon.